he killed a child before the eyes of the Prophet Musa, and it was mercy. What if you were shown your son's future, a future of murder and tyranny, and offered to change it at the price of 1 minute of pain, here and now? Could you do it? A story where supreme wisdom looks like supreme evil, where an eternal wanderer in green robes knows what is hidden from prophets. Are you ready to learn why sometimes the salvation of a soul looks like cruel murder? Khidr's hands smelled of sea salt and something else, something ancient as desert stones, a scent that had no name. When his fingers closed around the child's neck, the boy was still laughing. A second ago, he had been skipping flat pebbles across the surface of the Gulf, where the waters of the Red Sea met the Gulf of Aqaba. The child wore a simple linen shirt, sun-bleached and faded, his bare feet leaving prints in the wet sand. He was no more than 10 years old. The crunch of vertebrae sounded quiet, almost tender, like twigs crackling in a fire. The body went limp in the hands of the wanderer in green robes, and the boy's head tilted at an unnatural angle. Musa ibn Imran, prophet of the people of Israel, stood 20 paces from that place and could not utter a word. His throat constricted, as if an invisible hand had repeated Khidr's gesture on him. Waves licked the shore with lazy tongues, leaving foam on the pebbles. Gulls shrieked overhead, sharp, piercing, as if they too were witnessing a crime. The sun stood at its zenith, turning the sand into a scorching pan. But Musa felt cold, creeping from the nape of his neck down his spine. Khidr carefully lowered the small body to the ground. His movements were methodical, even caring. He straightened the child's shirt, closed his eyes with his palm. Then he straightened and looked at Musa. The wanderer's face remained impassive, as if he had just watered a flower or adjusted a fallen stone in a wall. Khidr's green robes, a long cloak over a simple tunic, rippled in the wind, and in the folds of fabric flickered shades that should not have existed. Emerald shifting to the color of young grass after rain, then darkening to the hue of ocean depths. These colors seemed alive, pulsing with their own rhythm. This was the man who had met Musa at dawn by the rocky shore. This was the one Musa had sought by command of the Most High, he who possessed hidden knowledge, inaccessible even to prophets. And now this bearer of divine wisdom stood over the body of the child he had killed, his hands still extended forward, as if frozen in the completion of a sacred ritual. The path to this moment had begun 3 days earlier, when Musa addressed his people with a sermon in a tent stretched between acacias. The air inside was thick with the breath of hundreds, permeated with the smell of sheep's wool and oil lamps. One of the elders asked, "Does there exist on earth a man whose knowledge surpasses that of a prophet?" Musa, not yet having learned humility after 40 years of wandering in the Sinai desert, answered that there was not. That very night came a revelation. There is a servant of God whose wisdom is deeper, for he sees not only the manifest, but the hidden threads of fate. In the morning, Musa set out with a single companion, a youth named Yusha, who carried his staff and a bag of dried fish. They were instructed to go to the place where 2 seas meet, and there, where the fish is lost, their meeting awaits. They walked along the shore, where red cliffs rose like walls to the sky, carved by wind into bizarre forms. The sun turned stones into ovens, and at night the desert cold made them shiver by fires of dry camel dung. On the third day, when they reached a narrow strait between cliffs, the fish in the bag came to life. Yusha watched in astonishment as it slipped from the salted cloth and dove into the water, leaving behind a strange trail, not air bubbles, but a glowing path like molten silver. He cried out to Musa, but the Prophet had already seen the sign. Khidr appeared at dawn the next day. He emerged from behind a boulder covered with salt deposits, as if simply strolling along the shore, rather than materializing from air. His face was ageless. It could have belonged to a man of 30 years, or 3,000. His eyes were dark, nearly black, but with sparks of light in their depths, like coals covered with ash. His beard was trimmed short in the manner of the ancients, and his skin had the shade of olive tanned under countless suns of countless epochs. Musa asked permission to follow him and learn. Khidr stopped, studying the Prophet with a long gaze. Then he spoke, and his voice sounded like an echo in a deep cave. "You will not bear patience with me, for how can you bear what you do not encompass in knowledge?" Musa insisted, swore to be silent and not ask questions. Khidr agreed, but set a condition. At the first violation of the oath, their paths would part. They moved north along the coast. Yusha remained by the boulder, bewildered, watching as two figures, one in prophetic white robes, the other in shimmering green, disappeared around the bend of a rocky path. The wind brought the smell of seaweed and something metallic, like blood. By midday, they reached a small cove where a fishing boat bobbed on the shallows. It was old, with patches on the sail and cracked boards. 3 men, a father and 2 sons, judging by the similarity of faces, were mending nets on the shore. Their hands were gnarled from labor, their faces burned by the sun to the color of old leather. When they saw the travelers, the younger son rose and invited them to cross to the other shore of the cove. Khidr nodded. They boarded the boat. The fisherman rowed in silence, only the splash of oars disturbing the quiet. In the middle of the cove, where the water became dark blue with depth, Khidr suddenly leaned down. His hands slid along the bottom of the boat, feeling for something. Then he rose, holding a heavy stone he had picked up from the shore before boarding. With one sharp movement, he smashed through a plank. Water rushed in with a hiss, as if the sea had inhaled. The fisherman cried out, lunged toward the breach. The elder son tore off his shirt, trying to plug the hole. The boat began to list. Musa gripped the side, his eyes darting from the rising water to Khidr's face. The wanderer sat calmly, observing the commotion, with the curiosity of a scholar contemplating an experiment. They managed to reach the shore, rowing desperately, bailing water with everything that came to hand. The boat beached, already half flooded. The fishermen jumped into waist-deep water, dragging the vessel onto sand. Their faces were twisted with horror and incomprehension. This was their only boat, their livelihood, the means to feed their families. Musa could not bear it. His voice broke into a shout. "You pierced it to drown people. You have done a terrible thing." Khidr turned to him slowly, and in his eyes flickered something like disappointment. "Did I not tell you that you would not bear patience with me. Musa lowered his head, remembering his oath. He asked forgiveness, promised not to violate the condition again. They left the cove, leaving the fishermen desperately trying to seal the hole. The sun tilted toward sunset, staining the sea the color of rust and old blood. They spent the night in a crevice between rocks, where the wind could not reach them, but brought sounds, the scraping of sand on stone, the distant howl of jackals, the whisper of the sea. Musa could not sleep. The image of the pierced boat stood before his eyes. He tried to find logic in Khidr's actions, some hidden meaning, but his mind hit a wall of incomprehension. Nearby, wrapped in his green cloak, slept the wanderer, his breathing so even, so calm, as if he had just performed a good deed. Dawn painted the sky in stripes of pink and yellow. They moved on along the coastline, climbing rocky paths, descending into valleys where scraggly thorn bushes grew. By midday, they reached a small settlement, a dozen mud brick houses clustered around a single well. The smell of goat dung mingled with the aroma of baking bread. Women in dark veils carried jugs on their heads, their silhouettes swaying smoothly like candle flames. Children played near the well. Their laughter rang in the dry air, bright and pure. They chased each other between houses, raising dust with bare feet. One boy separated from the group, the very one who in a few minutes would be dead in Khidr's hands. He ran toward the Gulf shore, where a strip of sand began, searching for pebbles for his game. Khidr stopped, his gaze fixed on the child with such intensity that Musa felt goosebumps on his skin. In that gaze there was no malice, not even coldness. It was something else, absolute knowledge, vision of what was hidden behind the veil of time. The wanderer moved toward the boy with measured steps, and each step was like a drumbeat before an execution. The boy turned, saw the approaching man in green, smiled, lifted a handful of pebbles, showing what beautiful ones he had found, one with veins of white quartz, another smooth as an egg. Khidr extended his hand, as if wanting to look at the finds. The child trustingly came closer, and then happened what made Musa's world overturn. Khidr seized the boy by the shoulders. The movement was quick, but not rough. The child did not even have time to be frightened. The hands moved to the neck, and Musa heard the crunch. Short, final, a sound that would haunt him to the end of his days. The body sank onto the sand, pebbles scattered from unclenching fingers, bouncing in all directions. One rolled to Musa's feet and stopped there, accusing and mute. The Prophet did not remember how he found himself nearby. His hands trembled, his voice broke into a cry. "You have killed a pure soul without guilt. You have truly done a terrible thing." He wanted to push Khidr away, wanted to lift the child, breathe life into him, undo this madness. But the boy was dead. His eyes, just moments ago so alive, stared at the sky with an empty gaze, reflecting clouds drifting across the firmament. Khidr straightened. On his face was neither regret nor triumph, only the calm of a master who had completed complex work. "Did I not tell you that you would not bear patience with me?" His voice sounded soft, almost sympathetic, but in it rang unshakable certainty. A woman ran out from the nearest house. Her wail tore the air, turned into lamentation, ancient as grief itself. She fell beside the body, pressed it to her chest, rocked back and forth. This was the mother. Behind her appeared a man, the father, with tools in his hands. He had just been repairing the roof. The tools fell to the ground with a dull clang. His face turned to stone, then contorted. He stepped toward Khidr, but the wanderer simply looked at him, and the man froze, as if an invisible hand held him. Khidr turned to Musa. "The time has come for us to part. Here is the interpretation of what you could not bear." But before he could continue, Musa cried out again, "No, tell me now. Explain this madness to me. How can a servant of the Most High kill children? What knowledge justifies the shedding of innocent blood?" The wind strengthened, bringing the smell of sea and distant deserts. Around them gathered the inhabitants of the settlement, forming a circle. Their faces expressed a mixture of horror, anger, and confusion. Someone picked up a stone. Another clenched a knife in his hand. But all froze, not daring to approach the man in green, who radiated something that kept them at a distance, not fear, but awe, before a power not belonging to this world. Khidr surveyed the gathered, then looked at Musa again. In his eyes flickered something like weariness, not physical, but the weariness of one who has carried the burden of knowledge incomprehensible to others for too long. He spoke, and his voice carried across the settlement, reaching every ear, penetrating every heart. As for the boat, it belonged to poor men working at sea. Ahead their path lay through waters where rules a king who seizes every vessel by force. Now they will return to their damaged boat, seal the breach, and when the king's collectors sail past, they will deem it too damaged, unworthy of seizure. In a month it will sail the waves again, feeding 3 families, and the captured ships will rot in the king's harbor, their owners dying of hunger. Musa listened, and something began to shift in his understanding, like tectonic plates beneath the earth. But the main question remained, and he pointed to the boy's body, still resting in the sobbing mother's embrace. And this murder, what knowledge can justify this? Khidr knelt beside the parents. His movement was filled with such unexpected tenderness that the mother stopped her lament and looked at him with wide eyes. The wanderer extended his hand and touched the dead child's forehead. "This boy," he said quietly, "was born with a soul inclined toward evil. Not through his fault. So was his fate woven. In his veins flowed blood that boiled with anger and cruelty. In 5 years he would have raised his hand against his father. In 10, he would have led a gang of bandits terrorizing caravans. In 15, he would have killed both parents in a fit of rage over their refusal to give him their last possessions." The father and mother stared at Khidr, unable to comprehend what they heard. The mother shook her head. "No, my son, my boy. But in her voice already sounded uncertainty. Perhaps she remembered flashes of causeless anger, cruelty to animals she had tried to explain as childish misunderstanding. Khidr continued, "But that is not the main thing. The main thing is that his crimes would have broken his parents' hearts. The father, unable to bear the shame, would have renounced his faith, cursing God for such a son. The mother would have followed him into disbelief. They would have lived the rest of their days in bitterness and died without hope of the Most High's mercy." He rose, now looking at the sky, where clouds were beginning to gather. "Therefore, the Lord willed that I take him now, while he is still innocent. His soul will enter paradise, for children are sinless. And to the parents will be granted another child, a daughter, pure of heart, who will be their consolation and remain righteous to the end of her days. Through the pain of loss, they will grow stronger in faith, not cast it away." Silence descended on the settlement. Even the wind stilled. The parents sat motionless, digesting the words. One could see waves of emotions running across their faces: denial, anger, incomprehension, and finally, something like terrible, distorted acceptance. Musa felt the ground slipping from beneath his feet. His mind, accustomed to clear commandments, "Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, honor thy parents," collided with logic that destroyed all foundations. Can knowledge of the future justify murder in the present? Does anyone have the right, even one endowed with divine wisdom, to take life to prevent evil not yet committed? But Khidr was already moving away from the settlement. His green robes rippled, and it seemed that the very fabric was woven from sea foam and leaves of trees that did not grow in these parts. Musa ran after him, his sandals clattering on stones. "Wait! There are more questions. There must be boundaries to this knowledge." Khidr stopped at the edge of the settlement, where wasteland began. Boundaries. He smiled, and this was the first emotion Musa had seen on his face. Boundaries exist for those who live in the stream of time, Musa. You see the moment. I see a chain of moments stretching from the creation of the world to its end. For you, this boy is an innocent child. For me, he is his entire life at once, from birth to the death that will not be now, and to another that would have happened, destroying his parents' souls. You play the role of God, Musa whispered. No, Khidr answered, turning to face the prophet. I play the role of God's instrument. The difference is immense. Each of my actions is not my choice. It is the fulfillment of will transmitted to me directly. I have no freedom, Musa. I have only knowledge and the duty to act according to it. He paused, and the wind strengthened again, bringing the first drops of rain, rare in these parts. Drops fell on heated stones, turning to steam with a hiss. You ask about boundaries, Khidr continued. Here is the boundary. I cannot do anything except what is prescribed. Even if I wanted to spare the boy, even if my heart, if I have one, were bleeding, I would still break his neck, because I have seen what will be if I do not. And this knowledge gives no choice. The rain intensified, turning into a real downpour, a phenomenon almost incredible for this parched land. Water streamed down Musa's face, mixing with his tears. He wept, not knowing exactly for what, for the dead child, for the parents left to mourn him, for a world where such cruelty could be mercy. Khidr stood in the rain, and the drops falling on his green robes rolled off without being absorbed, leaving the fabric dry. This was another reminder of his nature. He was here, but did not belong here. A being existing simultaneously inside time and outside it. How many? Musa asked, wiping his face. How many such decisions have you made? How many lives have you cut short or changed? Khidr looked into the distance, where sea merged with sky into a single grey canvas. Numbers have no meaning. Each case is unique. Each life is a separate universe. I have walked this earth 1,000 years before your birth, Musa, and will walk 1,000 years after. Everywhere my presence is required, I appear. Sometimes my role is to save, sometimes to destroy, sometimes simply to observe and bear witness. Were you human once, or were you created thus? The wanderer turned to him, and for the first time, Musa saw in his eyes something like pain. I was human, very long ago. I drank water from a spring that was not meant for me. Since then I cannot die, I cannot age, I cannot forget a single moment of all the centuries I have lived. Every face, every cry, every death is recorded in my memory with indelible ink. That is a curse. It is service, Khidr corrected. A curse would be to carry this knowledge without purpose. But I am given purpose, to correct the flow of fates, where small action prevents great evil or opens the path to great good. Musa hugged himself, suddenly feeling cold despite the warm rain. And how do you live with this? With the memory of all those you have killed, of all the maimed fates? Khidr closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, almost lost in the sound of rain. I do not live, Musa. I exist. These are different things. Life implies choice, joy, sorrow, wonder. I do not have this. I know what will be tomorrow, in a year, in a century. For me there are no surprises, no discoveries. There is only the fulfillment of what is preordained. He opened his eyes, and in them splashed something so ancient, so weary, that Musa involuntarily stepped back. Sometimes, the wanderer continued, I envy those I kill. They find peace. Their path is complete. And I continue to walk, century after century, knowing there will be no end until comes the day when the earth itself will roll up like a scroll of parchment. The rain began to subside as suddenly as it had started. Clouds dispersed, revealing a strip of clear sky on the horizon. The last drops fell rarely, leaving circles in puddles formed in hollows of stones. Musa took a deep breath. One last question. That boy, his parents, They will accept your explanation, but will they be able to forgive? Will they be able to live on, knowing their son was doomed to become a monster? Khidr turned, beginning to leave. His voice reached from afar, though he had taken only a few steps. In 3 months, the mother will become pregnant. She will give birth to a daughter and name her with a name meaning consolation. This girl will grow wise and kind. She will marry a righteous man, and from her will come a lineage in which in 20 generations will be born a teacher whose words will change the lives of thousands. And if the boy had lived, this girl would not have been. One life instead of another, one path instead of another. And choice, Musa shouted after the receding figure. Where is their choice? The parents, the boys himself. Khidr stopped for a moment, did not turn, but his words reached the Prophet's ears clearly despite the distance. Choice exists within predestination, as a river exists within its banks. Water is free to flow, but the channel is already laid. The parents chose righteousness in the past. Therefore, consolation is granted them in the future. The boy did not choose his nature, but his death now is mercy to his soul and to his parents' souls. Everything is connected, Musa. Every action births an infinite chain of consequences. Then he disappeared, did not dissolve dramatically into air, simply took a few more steps, rounded a rock, and was gone. Musa rushed after him, but beyond the rock was only an empty path stretching along the shore. No tracks on the earth wet from rain. No signs that anyone had passed here. Musa returned to the settlement when the sun was already tilting toward sunset, painting the sky in crimson and gold stripes. The boy's body had already been taken away. Near the house where the parents lived, women had gathered, their voices merging into prolonged lamentation, an ancient ritual, old as death itself. The Prophet stopped at the edge of the settlement, not daring to enter. What could he say to these people? How could Khidr's explanation, however logical it seemed from the perspective of eternity, comfort the heart of a mother who had pressed her son's cooling body to her chest? The boy's father sat at the entrance to the house, his head in his hands. When he raised his face and saw Musa, in his eyes was no anger, only emptiness. He rose, slowly approached the Prophet. They stood in silence, 2 men separated by an abyss of understanding. Finally the father spoke, his voice hoarse from tears. The man in green, he spoke truth about what my son would have become. Musa did not know what to answer. He was not certain of the truth of Khidr's words. How can one be certain about a future that has not come? But he nodded, because the lie of mercy seemed a lesser sin than a truth that would kill the last hope in this man. The father continued, Sometimes I saw something in him, flashes of rage, inappropriate for a child. He could strike another boy over a trifle, then not even understand why it was wrong. I thought, he'll outgrow it, learn. But now... He fell silent, looking at his hands, calloused, work-worn hands of a craftsman. Now I must believe that my son's death is mercy, must accept that someone I do not know killed him to save my soul. Tell me, Prophet, how to live with this knowledge. Musa placed his hand on the father's shoulder. I do not know. I walked with this man for 1 day, and my world turned upside down. You must live with this all your life. All I can say is, your faith will be tested every day, and how you pass through this test will determine not only your fate, but the fate of those who come after you. A woman appeared in the doorway of the house, the mother. Her face was swollen from tears, eyes red. She looked at Musa with a long gaze, then slowly nodded. In that nod was neither forgiveness nor accusation. There was only acknowledgement of a reality too heavy for understanding, but too evident to deny. Musa left the settlement with the coming of darkness. Stars spilled across the sky thick as scattered grain. He walked back to the meeting place with Yusha, his thoughts heavy and tangled like a ball of barbed wire. All the way back, he was haunted by one question. If Khidr spoke truth, if he truly saw the future and acted for good, albeit through evil, then how many more like him walk the earth? How many deaths, seeming random or cruel, were actually acts of hidden mercy? And, the most terrible question, if he, Musa, were given such knowledge, could he act the same? He imagined himself in Khidr's place, imagined reaching his hands to a child's throat, knowing he was saving the parents' souls. Could he? And he understood that no, that he would hesitate, doubt, seek another way, because he was mortal, limited by time and perspective. And Khidr was something else. On the third night of the journey, when Musa had lit a fire in a cave and sat gazing at dancing flames, revelation came to him. Not with thunder from heaven, not with a voice from the storm, quiet knowledge sprouting in his heart. Khidr was right and wrong simultaneously. Right in that his actions, dictated by knowledge, prevented greater evil. Wrong in thinking it was the only way, because divine will included not only the result, but the process. Not only the salvation of the parents' souls, but their freedom to come to that salvation independently, through trials. By killing the boy, Khidr deprived the parents of the choice to fall and the choice to rise again. He gave them a path paved with others' decisions. And perhaps that was why his face was so weary, because each time, fulfilling what was preordained, he took from people the most precious thing, the possibility to build their own destiny. When Musa returned to Yusha, the youth rushed to him with questions. Where had he been? What had he seen? Who was that man in green? Musa answered briefly, I met one who sees too much, and therefore lives too little. They moved back toward their people. Along the way, Musa did not tell of the pierced boat or the murdered child. These stories were too heavy, too complex for retelling. They required not words, but silent contemplation. But one night, many years later, when Musa was already old, and his beard had whitened like snow on Sinai's peak, he told this story to his followers. He told of the men in green robes who carried knowledge as a curse and fulfilled the will of the Most High through actions that seemed blasphemous. And he finished thus. Be grateful for ignorance. Be grateful that tomorrow is hidden from your eyes, because in this ignorance lives hope, lives faith, lives the very possibility of choice. Khidr knows all, and therefore is doomed to eternity without wonder, without the joy of discovery, without trembling before the unknown. We, mortal and blind to the future, possess a treasure of which he is forever deprived. The listeners dispersed that night in silence. Each carried away their own version of truth gleaned from the tale. And somewhere at the edge of the earth, at the confluence of two seas, a man in green robes stood on the shore and gazed at the waves. His face was calm, but his eyes held the pain of millennia. He knew that in 200 years he would meet another seeker of truth in this place, knew what words he would say, what actions he would perform, knew everything. And this knowledge was his eternal prison. The wind stirred the hem of his cloak, and in the folds of fabric flickered all shades of green, the color of life of which he himself was deprived the moment he drank water from the forbidden spring. He extended his hand, and onto his palm descended a bird, small, with plumage the color of sea foam. The bird was not afraid of him. Animals never feared Khidr. They did not know what he carried within, did not sense the weight of his fate. He stroked the bird's head with his finger, then tossed it upward, watching as it flew toward the horizon. Free, short-lived, happy in its ignorance. And for the first time in many centuries, Khidr smiled. The smile was sad, barely discernible, but it was there. Because even in eternity, even in omniscience, something human remained, the ability to value what one does not have. Waves ran up on the shore, rustled over pebbles, retreated, a cycle repeating millions of times. And Khidr stood, observing this cycle, knowing how many more times it would repeat until the end of time. Somewhere far away, in a small settlement by the Gulf, a woman felt the first signs of new life in her womb. In 9 months, she would give birth to a daughter. The girl would be named with a name meaning consolation. And the chain of events launched by one child's death would lead to the birth of a lineage of the righteous. Khidr knew this, saw this, and continued to stand on the shore, eternal guardian on the border between time and eternity, between knowledge and action, between mercy and cruelty. Immortal, omniscient, infinitely alone. And somewhere in the depths of his being, in a place where even divine knowledge did not penetrate, flickered a tiny spark, the desire to someday not know, not see, not fulfill, simply to be human, walking blindly through life, stumbling, falling, but walking by his own choice. But this would not happen. Never. Because such was Khidr's lot, to carry knowledge as a cross, to fulfill will as a sentence, to live as a shadow between worlds. The sun sank below the horizon. Stars lit one by one, and the man in green stood motionless, part of the landscape, eternal as the very stones beneath his feet.